plan to start reading this book, Buried Alive: The Terrifying History of Our Most Primal Fear by John Bondison. Jan Bondison, Buried Alive. In preparation for that, I've located some stories in newspapers. Primarily, I'm trying to find ones that are local to me, which is Michigan, specifically the Detroit area. And this one comes from the Kalamazoo Gazette, Friday, August 28th, 1885, courtesy of the Detroit Journal. This one is a happy ending. Most of them are not. Almost buried alive. A child ready for the grave returns to life. The grief stricken mother faints away with joy. The neighbors fly from the house with fright. Detroit Journal. Last Tuesday morning, the infant child of Charles Sullivan, who lives at 357 15th Street, apparently died. It was but 8 months of age and had been suffering for a day or two with some infantile ailment. The body was prepared for the grave, and in the evening the friends of the grief stricken family gathered to offer their condolences. The body lay in a neat white casket supported on two chairs in the center of the room. Its jaws were tied up and the little hands crossed on the breast. Candles blazed at its head and feet, and the mother echoed with the sobs of the mother and the lamentations of the friends. Mrs. Sullivan finally approached the casket to take one more look at her child. Her tears rained upon its pallid face, and she called it by name. She was startled to see the little hands raised toward her. Then the eyes opened, and the child began struggling with the wrappings which fastened its jaws. The child tore them off and began crying. The mother fainted. The more superstitious of the visitors ran in terror from the house. Mr. Sullivan snatched his child from the casket, tore off the grave clothes, and wrapped it in a blanket. The few remaining friends of the family who did not leave in a fright applied restoratives to Mrs. Sullivan, and in a short time she recovered consciousness. The lady could scarcely believe that her baby was alive. It was, however, and in better health than it had been for some time. Within 30 minutes from the time the child was taken out of the casket, it was nursing at its mother's breast. The casket was stored in the garret, the candles extinguished, and the tidings of the resurrection heralded abroad. The neighbors crept in, a little awed at first, but the mother's joy over the living infant soon wore away the gruesome feeling with which they regarded its return to life, and the house of mourning was turned into a house of rejoicing and joy. The child would have been buried the following morning. It had lain in a state of suspended animation fully 15 hours. Buried alive. Caroline Deckard. This is a crazy story right here about a guy who was buried alive but survived. And this is from Petaluma, Thursday morning, December 26th, 1867. A thrilling incident. We have before us a private letter detailing events that recently occurred in a southwestern Ohio town that gives peculiar force to the old adage that truth is stranger than fiction. We can give the main particulars of the letter without violating confidence or giving a disagreeable prominence to the chief actor in the strange incident or his friends. Mr. Delos W. is a wealthy and influential man residing near the village of P, and that's the initial, not the word P. On Thursday preceding the prize fight between Gallagher and Davis, the old gentleman was thrown into a high state of excitement at learning that his only son John had gone to Cleveland with the avowed purpose of attending the fight, and his excitement was intensified at still further. Discovering that John had helped himself to the father's pocketbook containing $200, Mr. W. fumed and fretted over the conduct of his son, and went to bed on Thursday night with a raging headache and marked symptoms of fever. He was about the place in a more composed state of mind on Friday, but the interview with John on Monday afternoon, immediately after the son's return, threw the old gentleman into a paroxysm of rage and grief, which was rendered doubly severe by John's insolence and his acknowledgment that he had lost 150 of the money in a bet on Gallagher. Mr. W.'s frenzied feeling finally got the better of him, and he felled his son to the floor with a blow of his fist, and immediately thereafter fell down in a senseless condition. Great excitement in the family ensued. The mother ran, screaming for assistance, which was soon forthcoming in the persons of several of the neighbors. Mr. W. was found in an apparently lifeless condition, with blood flowing from his mouth and nose. A subsequent examination by a physician led to the announcement by him that Mr. W. had died from the bursting of a blood vessel. So evidently had the vital spark fled that no efforts at resuscitation were made, and the remains were prepared for burial as promptly as it was possible. The funeral of the deceased took place the following Wednesday. Mr. W.'s body had only been coffined the previous day, up to which time it had laid draped in its shroud in the parlor. Notwithstanding the wonderful look of the skin and the color of the face, it occurred to no one to suggest a postponement of the burial till death was absolutely certain. The funeral was largely attended, and everybody remarked the lifelike appearance of the deceased. The remains were temporarily placed in one of the vaults of the cemetery, owing to the fact that a brick tomb commenced for their reception had not been completed. At 10 o'clock on Thursday night, the village was thrown into great excitement by the report that a ghost had been seen in the cemetery a short time before, and that the old lady who had seen it had been frightened into a fit, from which it was doubtful whether she would recover. Thinking that probably the ghost was personated by some scoundrel who had played the same trick several times before, a number of persons armed themselves with shotguns, proceeded to the cemetery, and commenced a cautious inspection, their hearts keeping up an anxious thumping in their bosoms in spite of their assumed bravado. They had not long to wait, for there, flitting among the tombs, was a white object, plainly to be seen. With trembling hands the guns were fired, when strange fact for a ghost, they saw the white creature fall between a couple of graves. Plucking up courage, they cautiously approached the object and turned a dark lantern upon it. Their feelings can be better imagined than described when they found that the ghost was the lately deceased Mr. Delos W. Whilst a portion of the party picked up the bleeding and senseless body of the old gentleman and started homeward with it, the remainder hastened to the vault. There they found Mr. W.'s coffin broken open and lying upon the floor, and the coffin of a deceased lady that had been placed upon it, likewise thrown down from the shelf and standing on end, partially broken, displaying its ghastly inmate. The vault door, which was a rather weak affair, had been forced upon by the resurrected W. The party then went to Mr. W.'s house, where they found that his wounds were not serious, and that he had recovered his senses. His story was briefly told. He had been carried to the cemetery in a trance. Early on Thursday evening, consciousness returned to him, and the horrid truth flashed upon his mind that he was coffined alive. This lent additional strength to his struggles to get free, and he finally succeeded in bursting the coffin. Mr. W. is now fast recovering, and seems good for a long lease of life yet. And that was from the Cleveland Plain Dealer. It's quite a few of these. There's the baby. The baby. Let's see if we can find any more buried alive stories. I'm going to go with this paper. That's a well. That's not quite buried alive. About this story. See what it says, bro. I'm supplementing this book, Buried Alive, The Terrifying History of Our Most Primal Fear. What is this? Do avalanches count? You're goddamn wrong, it does. I want to see what this is. Buried alive at Louis Saint Remy in Belgium. An appalling sensation has lately occurred. A young man who was believed to be dead and placed in a coffin and buried. I don't give a shit about Belgium. Let's find a story that's in America. Buried alive in a cemetery. Yeah, isn't that where most people are buried alive? What the fuck is this? Buried alive in a cemetery. For some past the work of removing the remains of the departed from the old Roman Catholic burying ground to the new cemetery has been quietly going on, and nothing more than might be expected under the circumstances occurred until the other day. No. The sacred ashes have been reverently taken from their narrow beds and removed by the hands of the loving friends to the new city of the dead. Affecting incidents have naturally occurred, and some scenes bordering on the revolting have been seen in the old cemetery. Recently buried bodies have been uncoffined that fond eyes might gaze upon their features for a last time before covering them again with the sod. One such incident of a startling nature occurred last Tuesday. A gentleman who was engaged in removing the remains of some of his deceased relatives was asked by an acquaintance who was similarly engaged to assist in lifting a coffin from the grave. He did so, and then the lid was taken off. To the horror of the small body of spectators who gathered around it, they discovered that the body, which was that of an uncle of the gentleman who was removing it, had been disturbed in the coffin. It was terribly contorted, as if the deceased had died in great agony. The face wore an expression of intense pain and horror. The arms were drawn up as far as the coffin would admit, and the head was twisted round to the shoulders, from which the flesh had apparently been gnawed by the struggling man. Sickened by the horrid sight, the spectators drew back from the coffin and looked speechlessly into each other's eyes. Not a word was spoken, but there was not a man present who did not feel that the deceased had been buried alive, probably while in a trance, and awakened only to perish in his living tomb. The coffin was closed and taken to the new cemetery, where it was decently interred. Every precaution was taken to bush up the affair. What the hell's hush up the affair? Looks like a B, but I guess it's an H. But it has got abroad, and we now publish it without giving names. Accidental burials of that sort. God damn it. What's this? Allegheny? Uh-oh, what's this one? Buried alive. Alright, let's look and see what this is about. Come on. Load, son of a bitch. What is this, a fragment? What are you doing to me? Looks like a clipping. Don't want a clipping. I want the damn story whole. What is this bullshit? All right, let's go back to page 2. Looks like the Jackson Daily Citizen from June 18th, 1874. I don't know why it did. Now, where's the damn story? Where's the damn story, boy? Mom? No, I can't find it. Well, that's unfortunate. Buried alive. Paris correspondent. Don't care about Paris. What's this? Samson's. Almost buried alive. A young man awakens after having been put in a coffin. He sues. He sues the Undertaker. That's fucking brilliant. From the Pittsburgh Leader. A most singular affair transpired at Fairman and Sampson's undertaking shop on Sandusky Street, Allegheny. How it will terminate can scarcely be imagined. A young man, the name of J.S. Prentice, who frequently rests himself on the steps and warms himself by the fire of Fairman and Sampson's, fell into such a sound sleep that some of the boys imagined him dead, and it is alleged by some of the police officers that he was almost past navigating when they saw him. It seemed that he never would wake until Gabriel called for him. Thinking he was a good subject to practice upon, the young men lifted him gently after embalming him slightly, and placed his limpid form in the freezing box, where they are wont to put dead people whom they wish to preserve. The lid was shut down, and the practical jokers waited patiently to see the result. For some time, all was quiet as death. This could not last always, and all of a sudden the lid of the freezer went flying through space, and the sleeper stood erect. He will not be paler when the old reaper gathers him in than he was at that moment. After looking around for an instant, he stared for Alderman D.L. Smith's office. He started, where he entered suit against them for disorderly conduct. He told some of his friends that his first impression on awakening was that he had been buried alive and that he was in for it. But in the hopes of spoiling a funeral, he concluded to give the lid a little hoist anyway. He expected to see weeping friends standing around and to hear ladies shriek with fright or possibly faint as dead as he was. His surprise cannot be imagined to see nothing but the dark walls of the undertaking office, and instead of sobs and shrieks, there was nothing but the stamping of the horses as they disturbed the quiet of some pestiferous fly and the giggle of a couple of mischievous boys. He says it was a little bit too practical for fun, and he means to make it not for them. The hearing takes place tomorrow evening. That's pretty fucking brilliant. Woman buried alive became a mother. What? I don't think that's an actual story. Oh no. That's Buenos Aires. We don't want to see that. Uh, was a babe, but its lusty lungs saved it. Woman buried alive, South Bend, Indiana. The coroner and police will be called upon to investigate a sensational case of a woman buried alive. A few days ago, a prominent society woman died, and when the undertaker came to perform his work, he noticed the body was warm and called the attention of the woman's husband to the fact. The undertaker did not embalm the body, neither did he cover the grave until the day following the burial. It was then noticed that the coffin lid was disturbed. An investigation resulted in the discovery that the woman had been buried while she was in a trance. She featured her features were terribly distorted. The hair on her head pulled out, the face cut, and the fingernails bitten off in a desperate effort to secure release from imprisonment. No names or other information will be given out until the investigation is completed. Um, Portland, Oregon. Let's see what this one is, bruv. Hey, ever hear that Johnny Cash song? No, I never heard it. Portland, Oregon. The victim had made was buried alive. Terrible fate of Carlton F. Wells of Portland, Oregon. Undertaker thought him dead. The victim had made a stake in the Arctic goldfields and just prior to his apparent death had forwarded the greater part of his little fortune to his wife in Trenton, New Jersey. His agony in the grave. According to a letter received by George P. Worth City, Carlton F. Wells, who left Oregon almost 2 years ago for fields, where it is said he succeeded in accumulating $20,000, was buried alive after his apparent death from heart disease in Juneau last May. Just prior to Wells's apparent death, he forwarded the greater part of his little fortune to his wife, who is now living at Trenton, New Jersey. A little more than a month ago, the undertaker who buried Wells received a letter from his widow asking that the body be exhumed and shipped east for permanent interment. Body in a cramped position. When the coffin was opened, the body was found to be in a strangely cramped position, the face turned toward the side. A close examination showed beyond any doubt that Wells had awakened from a death-like trance after burial. The skeleton of the right hand clutched a gutta percha plate, bearing three false teeth, which, in his agony, Wells is believed to have torn from the roof of his mouth. Near the place where his right jaw rested in the coffin was found a plain gold ring, which Wells had worn on the fourth finger of his right hand. In view of this terrible discovery, the undertaker and the doctor who had attended Wells decided not to send the body east unless forced to do so by a legal process. That's crazy. Is this the same story? Is this a total different story? Looks like it. It's gotta be. It's gotta be wrong. Two people buried in Portland in the same year. 2 months apart. Oh, came near being buried alive. Mrs. Mary S. Albertson, living at Columbia Slough, has just recovered from a trance which lasted a week, during which she would have been buried alive had not a friend noticed what he thought were signs of life and prevented the burial. She says she was conscious that she was to be buried alive, but was unable to give any sign to prevent that horrible fate. That's crazy. All right, let's see. Kentucky. That's just workmen buried alive. Oh yeah, this is a soldier who was buried alive. Was he buried alive? Evidence that Private Divini met a horrible death in his grave. A ghastly sight met the eyes of parties engaged in removing the remains of a soldier from Fort Lowell to the National Cemetery the other day. The evidences were plain that James Divini, a member of E Troop, 4th Cavalry, who died there 4 years ago, was buried alive. The head of the body was turned over to the left, and the right arm lying straight down by the side. The left arm was thrown over the left thigh, and the lower limbs were crossing each other. From the appearance and position of the lower jaw and portion of the face, which were yet intact, it is clear that animation returned after burial, and that he subsequently died in great agony. Divini's supposed death was caused by a kick from a mule. Let's go to page 2. Ditch caving, no. This may be one of those guys who buried themselves. Or not buried themselves, but were buried intentionally. We'll never try it again. Providence, Rhode Island, September 11th, 1896. John Hugel, who allowed himself to be buried alive on the theory of hypnotic suggestion induced by Professor Watson of London, has been unearthed. Hugel went to sleep, but he woke up 14 minutes ahead of schedule time. When Hugel came to be made it known by pounding upon the coffin, and during his struggles dislocated his knee pan. When he was brought to, he lapsed into a death-like stupor, which the physicians almost mistook for death. He was rubbed with whiskey and alcohol and revived. Hugel says that he will never do it again. When he awoke, he imagined he had been buried alive, and this almost crazed him. He was in the coffin 72 hours. Crazy. Belgium. Almost buried alive. feeling this is not going to be a natural burial. Nope. That's just a mob burial. Buried alive in Russia. We will look at this one. Buried alive in Russia. The secret revealed in a newly opened grave in Warsaw. St. Petersburg, I believe it says. A most extraordinary case which has astonished all the medical profession in Russia and Poland has just come from Warsaw. A short time ago, there died in the outskirts of the old capital, a young peasant woman who was buried with that haste which characterizes the funerals of the Russian peasants. A few days afterward, doctors were called to determine the cause of her death, but none could say positively as to the nature of a disease that had shown no symptoms whatever and which had brought this young woman to a premature and sudden end. She was buried in due course. However, it was rumored about the city that her husband often ill treated her, and at her death, some people went so far as to say that he was the cause of it. These rumors spread more and more until they reached the ears of the authorities, who immediately caused the body to be exhumed. The judicial commission followed the gravedigger to the cemetery, and the latter proceeded to disinter the remains. Having reached it, a rope was lowered, and after fixing it firmly around the half-rotten coffin, the ghastly fright was hoisted once more to the level of the earth. They opened the bier, and to their horror and stupefaction discovered not only the woman, but a second share of this, her lost resting place, in the shape of an infant that was lying at her feet. The child had arrived at entire maturity, and had been born in the tomb, where it lived for several hours. Thus the tomb of the mother had been both its cradle and tomb at the same time. As to the mother, it was discovered that she had been buried alive when in a comatose state, and on returning in consciousness gave birth to the child. It was easily seen that the poor woman had suffered terribly, for not only did the dried up blood, which was still visible upon the lips, giving evidence of the fact, but also her tongue, pierced by her teeth, and her hands clasped together convulsively. Burying people alive in Europe has occurred too often of late years, and can only be accounted for by the inattention of doctors, which in this case should be treated as a criminal offense. The fear of the living, of being immured alive, has gained such power over the mind that Russians, when on their deathbed, have left legacies for the foundation and maintenance of mortuaries in their native city, where supposed corpses are placed for 3 days in the hopes that their thread of life may not have parted. The mortuary of Freiburg can be quoted as an instance of these peculiar institutions, which are confined principally to Eastern Europe, where cataleptic fits are known to be more prevalent than in any other part of the globe. In the center of the cemetery of Freiburg stands a house which, to an unobservant person, would have every appearance of a small chapel. This thought would be suggested through the sight of a tower which contains a bell. But on entering this Lilliputian building, the searcher for knowledge might be astonished at seeing a human form. Dead to all appearance, the stiff, rigid body rests upon a marble slab, dressed in death's garments, and the rings which depend from a wire rope that runs through the ceiling are attached to its fingers. A further inspection, aided by the theory of the apparatus, which the genial attendant is will to give to all visitors, would explain the dead body. The fingers of the supposed corpse are pinched in the magnetic steel rings that fit tightly. Should the body show any signs of reanimation, the slightest quiver of the nerves of the fingers would affect the steel rings, which in their turn communicate with another stronger magnetic current that forces itself on the bell, making it toll, which brings an attendant physician to the rescue. By this means, several bodies placed in this mortuary since 1865 have returned to life. A peasant woman named Pazovsky recently walked from her tomb on the third day after her burial. There you go, bruvs. I'm done. Done.